Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week I'm going to try and record a short intro, but I never know what's really going to happen these days. Actually, my intros were never really that long, and then this virus happened, and all of a sudden I've been talking for 5 to 10 minutes before I get into the interviews. I've just been sharing a few minutes of my quarantine thoughts and experiences, and while I would never call the past couple of months fun, in the beginning, there was a little bit of fun to be had. I took it as a chance to reconnect with old friends that I hadn't talked to in 20 years. I'm sure everyone did something similar, whether it be Zoom chats, FaceTime calls, house party, whatever. I'm almost sick of those right now. Nothing will really replace the human interaction that we used to have, and what sucks is, for me personally, I'm never going to feel totally comfortable until there's a vaccine out there. I'll never shake a hand or use a handrail or do a lot of things that I used to do until I have that shot, and hopefully the shot works. But at this point, we are still locked in Washington, and there's been so much arguing nationally over whether states should open this early. The science says the states should stay closed, but science doesn't run the show in this country. It's a battle between science and politics. I mean, while scientists are saying stay closed, some politicians feel that we need to open up now to save our economy. And politicians make the rules. Regardless of what science says, states are opening up. It's a live experiment in healthcare for the world to watch, and it should make the next couple of months really interesting. We may be putting a lot of humans at risk, we may not. It depends on what side of the fence you're on. And while I've always been a believer in science, I now find myself rooting against science. I want all the scientists to be wrong so we see no spikes in this sickness. You know, less people dead. I will say that I'm really happy that my state isn't one of the ones that are opening up early. I'd rather see it play out, positive or negative, in other places that I would never live, and then make our decisions based off of that. I mean, shit. If things can open up and no one gets sick again, that would be awesome. We could all go ski hood again this summer, do dumb shit or any shit with our friends again, and we can live without fear of the beer flu. It would be amazing. And while that would mean myself and countless others overreacted by staying inside for the greater good, I can live with that. I'd have no problem admitting that we would have been smarter had we lived our lives like the protesters who brought guns, not masks, to state capitals in protest of the continued shutdown. Where am I going here? I guess I'm just hoping that the people being used as guinea pigs come out of this totally fine. And for that to happen, science and scientists need to be wrong. So please root against science. That was way more of an intro than I wanted, but you know how it goes. Now I have a big thank you, and it goes to Catherine Smith over at Skull Candy for sending over some more amazing headphones. Thank you so much. Skull Candy's all that I've used since I launched the podcast, and it's all because of Catherine. She's a badass behind the scenes. I've been trying to get her on the show for years, and she recently said yes, which is a word most women, my wife included, are reluctant to say to me. Hopefully we have her on the podcast soon. Speaking of saying yes, I got a dude to say yes to me this week. Dan Egan is a living legend who doesn't get the press he deserves. While I always credit Glenn Plake and Scott Schmidt as the first dudes who were able to make money in the ski world without having to compete, Dan Egan is the one who really blazed that path, but is often overlooked. Dan and I talk about so much on the podcast, but there's so much more to his story, and he's got a book, 30 Years in a White Haze, that comes out this fall. I'm sure there'll be a digital version for people who don't really do books anymore, and you can find out all of the information at whitehazebook.com. Before I chat with Dan, I want to ask you to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to it. I also want to let you know that I am currently 6-0 at my drinking challenges that run every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night. Like most things I do, these only take 2 minutes and they will be broadcast live on my Instagram channel, @The Powell Movement. You've made it through another long intro. Now it is time for me to thank my sponsors. They are Evo, Stanley, 686, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. They make this show happen. Now, let's talk to Dan Egan.
Hey, Mike Powell, how are you?
I'm pretty good. 23 days, I think, in the house. How about yourself?
Well, there you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
You better be clean. No dishes in the sink, dude.
I've been working, man. Podcasting you can do during quarantine.
That's right. Exactly.
So I've been stacking up interviews. But how have you been spending your time? How do you keep busy?
Yeah, it's hard trying to get on the government dole. That takes effort.
Do you have to apply for unemployment, or do you have to get your business, like a small business loan? I mean, is that what you're talking about, the government dole?
Yeah, all the above. All of the above.
So it's like the shittiest time that's ever happened to your business, I would say.
Yeah, I've had a lot of ups and downs, so I don't know if it's the shittiest time. But to me, it's just one more thing, The world is shifting here in ways that we are not sure.
Yeah. Is your primary business Egan Entertainment?
Yeah, Deegan Media is my current company. That's basically what I do. I produce content still, a little bit still in the ski world, but mainly in the sailing. I do a lot of big international sailing events and do a ton of business and marketing consulting, and then ski my butt off as much as I can.
Yeah, well, this is all going to come at the end of the podcast, but it's going to come at the beginning just because it sounds like an interesting and challenging time for the company. But do you also produce religious content or Christian content?
I do. I spent all day yesterday shooting Holy Week for the local parish here. We're going to stream 3 services, so we pre-recorded them yesterday. We did Palm Sunday, Holy Thursday, and Easter morning mass.
Huh. Well, that's a really good use of the technology for right now because people need that and they can't go to church on their own. Have you always been a religious guy or a man of God?
The Egan family has a long tradition of Catholicism. We were raised in the church. My great uncle founded Catholic Charities. My grandfather had 2 priests who were brothers. My aunt was a nun. My cousin's a priest. So we're bathed in Catholicism for sure. And through the trials and tribulations of life, I finally have decided that I am as Catholic as I am 5'7". I can't shake it. It is who I am. It's been embedded in my body and the way I think, the way I see the world. And yeah, I've produced content for Catholic television. I've done 2 television series for them on the Mass. The series is called Why We Worship. I had a podcast for a couple of years called Extreme Faith, A View from the Pew with a buddy of mine, which was us going through the Bible and talking about different topics.
You're scaring me here.
No, man, this is where it's at, dude. But it does stem out of this mountain disaster that I had 30 years ago.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that definitely in the podcast. I don't want to get into that this
Sure.
early. So business right now, I mean, I would think that with church, you would be able to create a lot of opportunities now because you can film, edit, and put out whatever. Is it streaming?
Yeah, we do a little bit of everything. We stream it. We'll produce it. We had a 4-camera shoot on the Mass yesterday. For me, that's all service work, dude. I do that because I can. I do that because I possess the opportunity, and I do that because I think it's important for the culture. When you look at the extreme sports culture, when you see that people believe today that dying doing what they love is a good death, you see the need for a different point of view. Athletics was always designed to enhance our lives, not end them. And, I think people are putting their faith misdirected, so to speak, in the wrong things. So whenever I have the opportunity to spread the message of hope, of faith, of future, of salvation, I do it.
All right. Well, I usually don't do that, but we'll leave that in the podcast. It's not right of me to take it out by any means. I'm Jewish, by the way, so totally different thought process, or a little bit different, whatever. But you're like a Boston guy. You grew up in a family of 7 kids, and that's like a basketball team. Where do you fit into that whole mix?
Yeah, so we had 8 kids. My brother Danny died as a baby.
Sorry.
And so if you count Dan, which I do, I would be number 6 of 8. Most of the siblings say there's 7 of us, so I would fall number 5.
He was Danny, and are you Dan as well, or is Dan your middle name?
Yeah, no, I'm Dan as well. My mother's twin was Dan, and my uncle Dan, my mom's twin, died training for the Korean War in 1950. So my mom's twin passed away back then, and she always wanted another Danny, so she named her baby Danny. Danny died, and then she named me Danny. So I had a really special relationship with my mom. My mom and I really had a bond, I think, that was sort of unspoken and never really was mentioned about the tightness of that in the name. But during the height of my ski career, she would always pick me up from the airport, but she never liked dropping me off.
worried about that name.
Yeah, she was.
But your family, you guys were all about the outdoors. It was skiing, sailing, and I'm sure whatever else you guys could get into. With sailing and skiing, I would think the family has to have money because nobody sails or skis if they're poor. What was the family business?
So we lived on top of a hill, and we skied out our back door in Boston, right outside of Boston. Our backyard was our playground. We skied, we built a homemade skating rink, we played sports and wiffle ball and street hockey. We had go-karts. We had a big driveway where we could ride the go-kart. My older brothers were into hot rods in the 70s, and, we were switching out engines in the backyard and all that sort of thing. My dad was a doctor. He was a neurologist. He was not sort of an athlete, as one. My dad never rode a bike. He was legally blind in one eye.
And he was a doctor?
He was a doctor. Yeah, he was not a surgeon, but
Okay.
He was a brilliant man. And so my dad loved to sail and he loved to ski. He skied as a boy. My mom grew up in a family of 5. All her brothers skied. They shared one pair of leather boots and wooden skis. My grandfather's house was the highest house in the city of Boston, and they used to ski down the median strip of the parkway. So my mom was a gym teacher. I learned all my sports through my mom and played catch with my mom and basketball with my mom and learned to sail with my dad, skied with my dad and mom. And my mom, having so many kids, needed to have a day off. So she signed us all up for a ski club. And every Saturday we would go with Blizzard Ski Club out of Boston. We'd get picked up in a bus and would go skiing up north. And my dad would go too. So my mom would get the whole day off. She put all the kids and my father on that bus every Saturday morning at 5 a.m. That's how we learned to ski.
Hearing that there was hot rodding and stuff as well, because when I think of sailing, I think of like popped collars, Sperry topsiders, and that kind of stuff. Was that you guys, or was it more like wrenches?
Yeah, my dad was a very practical man. He worked hard, and he only had every other weekend off and Wednesday afternoons. So he was a sailor, and he kept his boat in South Boston. We were members of the South Boston Yacht Club, and anybody who knows anything about South Boston knows that that was not a Sperry topsider yacht club. That was a rough and tough place. But my dad liked it because he could get there quickly. He could get from his office to the boat. And I learned to ski in the South Boston Yacht Club junior sailing program. I would go there every day in the summer. I would walk a half mile to the train station, take the trolley to the train to the bus, and walk to the club.
People don't do that anymore.
No, they don't let you do that. And my mom always said, be home for dinner. That's all she ever gave me. I did that from the age of 7 on. And by the time I was 10 and 11, I was sailing solo all around the Boston Harbor and up and down the coast. And the South Boston Yacht Club, whenever we went to another regatta, the other clubs would lock their doors because Southie had quite a reputation for the kids that belonged there. And it was not a Sperry topsider yacht club, but they did have a junior program. They had great sailing instructors. That's how I learned to sail. My oldest brother, Bobby, sailed. My dad sailed. The other kids didn't really sail.
Were you guys all tight? Because I think you and John are like 6 years apart.
Yeah.
Were you closest with him the whole time growing up, or was there another sibling that you hung out with more?
As families go, I think we were tight as kids, My oldest brother, Bobby, and I sailed. So we did that all the time together. He's 8 years older than me, but we were very close. And John and I were close, but as John got into his teenage years in the 70s, my mom thought it was not age appropriate for me to hang out with him too much. Those were some different years. And then my younger brother, Ned, who lives in Tahoe, he's just 2 years younger than me. So we did all the sports together. We were team sports guys. We played soccer and baseball and all that sort of stuff. And then the older kids, were into their thing. They were quite a bit older than us, but we were all tight in our own way. We all skied together, and we had different activities we'd get together. Bob and John were both gearheads. They had the engines and the cars and stuff like that. They taught us what we could. So, yeah, in a lot of ways, my brother Bobby raised me. We palled around together. He allowed me to hang out with him. And as I started to get older, John allowed me to hang out with his crazy crew. And so I was exposed at a young age to a lot of wild behavior.
And how often are you skiing in the winter at this point? Is it still just a Saturdays thing? Because I think Blue Hills is kind of near where you grew up. Is it something you could get to after school?
Yeah, John and Bob founded the high school ski team in 1974. That ski team has a long legacy now. And so we would ski at Blue Hills after school and evenings. In junior high and high school, we would train with the team and race for the team. Really, I always say I was a average skier in high school. Never raced as you think about it today, on Eastern skiing or anything like that. No USSA stuff, very, very little. But I did manage to be third in the Bay State Ski League and league champion and all that sort of stuff. And by the time I get to high school, John is skiing on the World Pro Ski Tour and the World Pro Mogul Tour. So, I'm seeing his ski career develop, so to speak. I'm enjoying skiing, but soccer was my main sport.
So you're focused on soccer. John's focused on skiing. He doesn't take the college route. I think he goes to Sugarbush and he's going to learn how to ski like the shittiest conditions possible, get really good at them, then move out west. And he starts making it on the East Coast, which is really hard to do as a skier. I would think, especially at that point. He's 2 years into being a ski bum or 3 years, and he starts shooting with Warren Miller. Now, you're just a high school kid at that point. Is your mind absolutely blown that your older brother is doing this thing that you guys think is like the coolest sport ever?
Yeah, they used to have a Pro Tour ski race at Neshoba Valley just outside of Boston. Neshoba's so small, they used to start the pros up in the woods. So John was racing on the tour and he was staying at the house. And the day he went to the race, he was in his padded pants and padded sweater. And he said to me, "Hey, Dan, these are my work clothes." That statement for a 14-year-old boy really left a mark on me. I was like, wow, he's going to work. And then when we saw him in the movies, that was another mind blower. It's like, wow. And I had said to John at one point, I said, wouldn't it be fun to ride every chairlift in the world? John said, it's possible, Dan. It is possible. And so John and I always sort of connected at this level of seeing what was possible. John always lived his life with no limits. He was a go-for-it kid. He knew no boundaries as a young boy. He would do anything.
Always getting stitches and broken bones kind of kid?
Not really like busted up, but he would go for it. John was really that way. He lives that way still. I admire him for that. He's very bold and he's very confident and he wakes up in shape. He's never worked out a day in his life.
Okay.
Me, I've had to work at it, so to speak, to stay in fit. It's more of a focus for me, but John and I always connected on this level of like what would be possible. And my senior year in high school, he was sending me postcards from Squaw Valley. He would just send me this crazy photo of the Palisades and he would write on the back of the postcard, "Dude, you can't believe what's possible out here." Again, that was just really powerful things for me to get. And he was always setting the bar very high as far as skiing goes. He came to one of my high school races one time and he said, Dan, if you just did half of what you know, you would have won today. He was just very matter of fact about things. And when I was a very young boy, he told me the only way to improve was to ski as fast as I could until I crashed and then stand up and do it again.
Right.
He said, sooner or later, you'll stop falling every 15 feet. You'll go every 50, 60, 100 feet. And before you know it, you'll beat me to the bottom. And that's how I practiced. I would just go as hard as I could until I crashed. I wanted to keep up with my older brother. That was really the motivation.
And it was a strange time in skiing because years earlier, when you were getting into skiing or a few years into skiing, there's like the hot dog movement. That's like the early 70s, but that's shut down by the insurance companies and they pretty much kill that whole movement. The next progression for the cool kids was skiing bumps. Did you gravitate that way when you were in high school?
Yeah, because we lived on that hill, we were always skiing through the trees and building jumps over the neighbor's fence and doing stuff like that. And of course, everybody wanted to be Wayne Wong and we were watching all that stuff. But moguls was really the proving ground. If you could ski the bumps, you had something to show. And with John on the World Pro Mogul Tour, ninth in the world on the World Pro Mogul Tour, that was really impressive. And we would watch Joey Cordeau in the moguls.
Mm-hmm.
Joey Cordeau, my God, the man was silk. and he was in all the Dick Barrymore movies, and we wanted to ski like Joey. John was competing against Joey Cordeaux, and that was blowing my mind. But also on the race tour, John was competing against Gary Agate and Peter Dodge and all these guys I had posters of in my bedroom, And he would call me up and tell me, hey, I was 0.4 of a second behind Gary Agate. And I'd be like, holy cow, dude, like that's amazing,
Yeah.
Like you were side by side with these people. And that was really, really motivated me at a really subconscious level.
Is he going on the Warren Miller tours and coming back to Boston when they're playing at the ski shows?
He would pop in and we would see him as families. We'd go as a family. It wasn't quite the same way it is now. Warren wasn't into making stars, and there really weren't that many people in the movies at the shows. We just went as ticket holders to watch him ski, and so did he. This is pre-VHS tape, dude. This is like early days.
Did he live narrate at that point?
Warren did live narrate. I never saw Warren live narrate at that point in my life, but Warren and I knew each other at that level, and he taught me in the end how to live narrate. I believe I'm one of the last people to still do it.
Okay. And at this point in your life, your brother's blowing up, you're in high school, soccer is your sport, right? That's where you excel?
It is, yeah. I got into college because I could kick the ball, and it took me 2 years to get into the college I wanted to get into. Babson College, they were a nationally ranked team, had won 4 national championships, and I always wanted to play for them. And I didn't have the grades to get in, so I spent another year going to a postgraduate high school. I got my first A and got into school and played ball for Babson, and that was good. They had a great ski team as well. We trained at Blue Hills. I raced for Babson my freshman year and then started taking my college semesters off my sophomore year.
Now it is time for me to take my first sponsor break. And my first sponsor is Evo. And while Evo's retail locations are closed for distancing, don't worry. If you haven't been to evo.com lately, you are missing out on the best deals on the internet. Evo is the first website to focus on the digital space in action sports, and they do it better than anyone else. They have all the brands, all the products, and the resources and customer service to make sure you get what you need. If that's not enough, Evo offers free shipping on orders over $50, a low price guarantee, and a hassle-free return policy. And I have a special deal for you. Shop for any Evo branded product that is as good or better than the big brand stuff, and when you check out, use the code POWEL20 and you will save 20% on your entire order. Evo gives a percentage of sales back to local charities, and right now, that is more important than ever. My next sponsor is 686. They have been the independent outerwear brand in snow since 1992, and they make the best gear on the planet. That's no bullshit. My 686 Glacier jacket is the best jacket I've ever owned. And since 686 sent me a pair of Everywhere pants, I've lived in them. Next, they ship the Everywhere shirt, which is now my favorite shirt. And go figure, another box arrives the other day and they've one-upped themselves again with the Everywhere shorts. It's the same great design as the Everywhere pant, only made into a short. And they're stretchable, breathable, and they dry quickly. They're perfect for when we can start playing outdoors again. You can find out more about the Everywhere shorts and all things 686 over at 686.com. Those are some of my great sponsors. Now, let's jump back into the podcast. Even before you get to Babson, what kind of group do you fit into back then? Are you like the long-haired? What did you look like? What kind of music were you into? Were you partying back then? Who were you?
I won the 8th grade disco contest. I won a disco album, and I was so excited. And John was at home, and he said, "What's this?" I said, "Oh, I won that at the disco contest." And he opened the 3rd floor window of the house, and he threw that album out like a Frisbee and goes, "We don't listen to that shit in this house." And so I was a little bit of both. John had taught me a lot of things. So I was a bit of a partier, but I was a little bit of a closet partier and was hanging out with a good group of kids. And I was in the school band for quite a while until I made a batch of pot brownies and got everybody stoned before the big school concert. And I was later not invited back, but I was a class vice president and that sort of thing. So I was doing my best to be a good kid.
Getting bad grades, but overachieving with like extracurricular activities?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And it was a totally different time for a high school kid. I mean, I think the drinking age was 18. There was no AIDS. It must have been like a lot of fun.
Well, I mean, of course, high school's awesome. And being in a big family, we had a lot of fun. In those days, the rules were a little bit different than today.
Yeah.
The walls were a little softer and the neighborhood kind of kept you on track. So we got away with a lot of stuff. We were very, very lucky. The way we drank and the way we partied and the way we drove, we were very, very lucky.
Yeah. I think a lot of people can say that, the way they drove, because that's totally changed in the world. But in your world at that point, you go to Babson College when it's like the Animal House days. You're on the soccer team there. Eventually, you start taking winters off and you're skiing. But it all progresses to the point where you get invited on a shoot with Warren. How does that all progress? And does that change your whole outlook in life?
Yeah, I was washing dishes at the Elpin Inn up at Sugarbush, Vermont. The phone rang in the kitchen, and it was the marketing director of the ski resort. And he asked me one question. He said, "Do I own any clothing that doesn't have duct tape on it?" I said, "I don't know. I could probably borrow something." And he says, "Well, if you show up at the lift tomorrow at 8 a.m., there'll be a Warren Miller cameraman there, and they want to shoot you." So I did that. And John had kind of taken a few years off. He was not skiing full time at that point. He was building condos. So he took the day off from building and he showed up, and it was February vacation week. And we were shooting with Fletcher Manley, one of the early cameramen for Warren. And John had shot with Fletcher before, but we weren't having a very good day. The two of us kept falling in the moguls, and Fletcher was getting very frustrated. And we were skiing upper FIS, which is a very steep East Coast mogul run. And down below, there's a blue run that comes across the bottom of it. And there was a big crowd of people. And Fletcher said, "I want you Egan Brothers to ski one behind the other and don't crash this time. If you fall, it could be the last time we ever shoot you." So they yelled, "Roll cameras." John jumped in. I was right behind him, and we were keeping it together pretty good. About 3/4 of the way down, John hits this mogul and takes some air. I can tell it's not going too good from where I'm skiing. He's looking me at the face, his arms up over his head, and he crashes. And I hit that mogul and jump up over him. He's got skis and poles and everything all over the slope. And I ski down to the bottom, and the crowd is in hysterics. The cameraman's hanging his head. And my parents were visiting for school vacation week, and they were in the crowd. And somebody from the crowd yelled, "Who the heck raised these two characters?" And I looked over and saw my mom, and I could see her thinking, lawyer, doctor, Indian chief is never going to happen for these two kids. So she raised her ski pole and she whacked the guy across the shin, and she goes, "They're my boys." And I always took that as a seal of approval from my mom to follow my dreams and keep going. So yeah, that was my first time skiing for Warren. And that definitely lit me up. I thought, wow, if John can do it, I can do it. And they've asked us both to do it. So maybe there's something to it.
And back then, there was another famous set of brothers, the Mayer brothers, that were out there. And they were a huge story because they were winning. But did Warren and his whole team see it as a novelty where they could have two brothers who could rip and they could be marketed together?
I think at that point in 1984, I don't think they did. But later, when I finally got out of Babson and started to pursue it, and John together as the Egan Brothers, once we started marketing the Egan Brothers, for sure, Warren saw it right away. But what he saw, too, was not that the two brothers could be marketed. What he saw was two guys that could do it side by side, really close, really tight. John and I really did ski a lot alike back then. And the fact that we could be in really tight situations and read each other really well, I think, is what he saw.
And when you're in school, once you get your first Warren Miller shoot in, does it start to be where you're going to travel the next year and go on some Warren Miller trips, or does that happen after you get out of school?
Well, I called my brother John to tell him I was going to come up and wash dishes. He said, "When are you going to finish school?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I need a break." And he goes, "Don't come up here if you're not going to finish school." So I told him, I said I'd go back to summer school. He goes, "If you go back to summer school, come on up." So I graduated college in 4 years. Every time I took a college semester off to ski, I went to summer school. played soccer for 4 years every fall and took 2 winters off.
You guys win any national championships?
We did not. My senior year, I'm co-captain of one of the few losing teams in the history of the school.
Oh, sorry.
And still a sore topic, but my coach is still the coach there. And after graduation, I coached there. And, I love Babson. And it was a soccer fraternity for sure. And of course, I wish that dream had ended differently, but it did not.
Well, you could have a better pro career in the ski world, I think, than the soccer world at that point. Because in the U.S., maybe the Cosmos were around back then, but that league didn't last too long.
Correct.
So, like you said, you're going to move up and ski all winter. And are you going to be traveling during the winter as well? And then living like a double life, like student 3/4 a year, and then pro skier 1?
Well, I got fired from the Elpin Inn from my dishwashing job. So I bought a one-way People Express plane ticket for $75 to California and went and experienced Tahoe because I had never been to Squaw and John had been out there and I wanted to see what it was like. So I went right to Tahoe. I hiked up to the Palisades, jumped off, crashed, went right back up there, crashed again, hiked right back up there, crashed again. And this guy came up to me and he said, "That's pretty big air you're taking." And I said, yeah. He goes, "Have you ever thought of landing?" And so I had a lot to learn, and I started to learn it.
Because that place, all the rock stars are at Squaw Valley at that point. That's where you go if you want to ski gnarly stuff.
It was. I mean, it was the budding place to be, It was about to explode, and it was the place to go and learn. And, on any given day back then at Squaw Valley, you had Powder Magazine, skiing, snow country, Warren Mill. Like there were film crews there all the time. So you were watching other people like Tom Day and Scott Schmidt and Kevin Andrews go to work. And as a ski bum, that was like, wow, look at that. There it is right in front of me. And also knowing that John had done that. So that winter, what I did is I thumbed from Tahoe all the way back to Denver. And I went from ski area to ski area.
Huh.
And I just wanted to see the West. I had never been out there. So I thumbed all the different resorts with my skis and boots. I was traveling alone. I had no money and I would crash on friends' floors. I had a sleeping bag. I would camp out and I would go to all the 2-for-1 happy hour to eat and drink and scam lift tickets. That was very impactful. And then the following winter, when I took a semester off, I went right back to Squaw and lived out there for the winter. It really started to break through, I was the breakfast chef at a place called the Clock Tower Cafe, and I would pour coffee in the morning for all the ski patrol and the ski instructors and stuff. And I went and skied the finger chutes one day and fell, and my pole got stuck in the fingers. And the next morning, the patrol and the ski instructors are like, "Hey, kid, that's your pole, huh?" They were all razzing me that my pole was up there. And I'm a wise-ass Boston kid, so I kept saying, "Why don't you go get it for me?" And none of them would do it. So I waited about a week, and then I went up there, and I ripped the line and grabbed my pole in the middle of it and skied on down. And the next day, it was like a whole different world. They let me in. They looked at me different. They spoke to me different. They invited me to ski with them. That was a real sort of coming of age moment for me and sort of the locals.
Off the snow, just your Boston attitude is so different than what everybody's used to in Squaw Valley that might rub people the wrong way.
For sure. I mean, you look, when you're an Irish kid growing up sailing and going to South Boston, you wake up every day and go, "This is a private fight, or can anybody be involved?" You know, that's the attitude. And so, yeah, it did rub the Californians differently, and the Western people. So I agree with that.
And then you come into the place where you've already been in a Warren Miller movie. So people might have seen you a little bit and they're like, "Who is this punk ass who's coming here thinking he owns the place when he doesn't know anything about Squaw?"
Well, I mean, that's, like any good local ski area, of course, you got to earn it, you got to break in.
And that moment was when you broke in on the fingers?
I believe so.
And then it's back to school after that semester, and eventually you graduate from Babson. So it's like you're this dirtbag Boston ski bum who's going to, I think Babson's a private college that pumps out really smart kids. So it's like a nice juxtaposition there.
Yeah, I mean, it's the #1 private business school and entrepreneurial school in the country.
Oh, geez.
and it's in a dry town. It's a very different spot. I went there to play soccer, and I knew that it potentially would get me the best education possible. That was all true. Babson really formulated my entrepreneurial spirit, my marketing mind frame. And the following winter, when John and I go out to sort of make a name for ourselves, we went to the SIA show. We were living in our van, and John said, "You went to that fancy college. Get in there and make us some damn money." And that's all the instruction he gave me.
Do you just go booth to booth looking for people to feed your habit pretty much with cash and product?
We did. I went to Fisher Skis because I knew their office was in Boston. They took the meeting, and I walked out of the meeting, and John said, "How did it go?" And I said, "I think it went pretty good." And he said, "What'd you get?" I go, "They're going to pay us cash and give us as much skis as we want. They're going to name a ski after us." And he goes, "What the hell did you tell them?" And I said, "I told them we were going to ski around the world and make movies." And he goes, "Good. Tell the next people that." And so that's kind of how it went.
I would think at that point, it's tough to be a pro skier. It's like 1988. Blizzard of Oz hasn't come out yet. And the Warren Miller movies, they're what was out there. You had Barrymore before, and Barrymore is, I think, fading or is done at that point. And there really isn't a way to be a pro skier. I feel like Plake and Schmidt and those guys with Blizzard paved the way for everybody. But it sounds like you were doing it before those guys getting paid, just in your own way on the East Coast.
I mean, it's a nice story that those guys paved the way, and it's sort of the legacy of Blizzard of Oz.
For sure.
But it's not the true story. It's just a nice story.
Yeah.
The truth is, like everything, technology drives the market. And when the VCR machine comes on the market and VHS tapes become popular and the Mayer brothers retire, the entire industry changes. Without heroes on the U.S. ski team, the industry starts to look for another way to find excitement. And with the VHS tape coming into people's homes, I believe it's the start of social media. It's the first time that niche sports are invited into people's homes in a very unique way. Everybody was in on it. There was only a handful of people that really landed paying gigs. You had Scott, of course, was out in front of everybody. He was making it happen. You had Tom Day, you had Robbie Huntoon, you had Kevin Andrews. John had skied with all those guys. Plake, of course, was around. And the same winter of all that happens, North Face launches the North Face Extreme team.
You're part of that, right? The inaugural team?
We were part of the first team, and we showed up in Tahoe, and they said, "Tomorrow's the tryouts." We got an invite. We showed up to Alpine Meadows. There was a box of clothing. They said, "Put it on and go jump off cliffs." We were jumping and going back up and hucking off cliffs. And halfway through the day, I said to my brother, "How am I doing?" He said, "Has anybody asked you to leave?" He goes, "Just keep doing it." And that's how we signed with the North Face.
And were you required to wear a one-piece for your entire career?
Well, those were great one-pieces. They made a Gore-Tex one-piece, which I still wish they'd made. So when you had technology like VHS and you had all this stuff happening, you were really paving. The whole world was changing. And we were in there with everybody trying to make it work. I mean, I remember going up to Wayne Wong when I first met him at the SIH show, and I asked him for some help and guidance. And he just looked at me and said, "Kid, you're doing fine. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." And so it was really a combination of things. Of course, Hot Dog, the movie, really changed everything. That was the birth of really how we came to see Squaw Valley, how the world came to see Squaw Valley.
And was that movie huge in its prime? Because, I don't remember when it hit theaters, although I've seen it many times since. But was that like a really big deal?
Yeah, it was a huge deal. And what was huge about it was skiers like Robbie Huntoon and Tom Day and Schmitty, those guys got to ski in the movie as stump doubles. So they made good money. And we were all like, hey, people are getting paid to do crazy stuff. And that was the whole thing. It all hit at once. Like all good ideas, they kind of exist on their own. It's not like one guy or one person. It's collective consciousness, right? And at that point, the collective consciousness was about VHS tapes and this idea of extreme sports, you know. I always told Shane and Gaffney and those guys, don't change the name to Free Ride. We broke our backs trying to get Madison Avenue to pay us for the word extreme. Don't go and reinvent the brand. You're doing the same thing. But there did come a time where they didn't want to be associated with quote unquote extreme. But there was a time.
Extreme, just it's kind of either meant you were selling deodorant or it meant you were going to take a risk that you shouldn't take. Where all the risks that you and Shane and all those dudes were very calculated risks by experienced professionals. And I think the term extreme almost marginalized what they did. It just meant like, oh, this dude's young and wants to jump off something.
Well, I mean, it sort of did, you know, you have to look at that from all angles, you know, I mean, it certainly did not mean that in Europe. Europe had a lot of respect for the word extreme and still does.
But that was more gnarly and adventure over there, I feel like, than it was here, where it was more like the Hollywood shot.
Yeah, it was, you know, like everything in America, we glitz and glam it. We MTV it.
We go bigger. You know, if we're going to get coronavirus, we're going to triple the numbers.
We're going to go big, you know, and that's the way it is. And I think we market things. So when it came to extreme, you had some pretty amazing marketers here, you know, Stumpy and Plake and myself. I mean, we were really thinking about how to market it. It wasn't random to us. It was part of the plan.
Now it is time for my final sponsor break, and I'm going to start things off with Stanley, the brand that has been a leader in keeping things hot and cold for over 100 years. They invented the vacuum bottle, and you've seen it so many times in your life. You know, that green bottle that kept your grandpa and your dad's coffee hot all day long? Well, Stanley still makes a bottle like that, and they work better than whatever you're using right now. The reason Stanley is the leader in hot and cold is because their product is better. I mean, they created the category and they keep innovating. But Stanley makes so much more than that iconic bottle. I personally use the water bottles and pint glasses daily, and my drinks stay hotter or colder than yours by at least an hour. You deserve that same quality. Now you can get 30% off all Stanley products by heading to their site, stanley-pmi.com, entering the code Powell and the number 30, all one word, and boom, it's that easy. My final sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery, and they have been brewing beer out of Bend, Oregon since 2006. And since they started brewing beer, they are committed to skiing, snowboarding, biking, and drinking beer outside. While I see a lot of copycat brands out there lately trying to mimic what 10 Barrel is doing in the outdoor space, no one puts their money where their mouth is like 10 Barrel. This year, they produced both a ski and a snowboard movie. The ski movie is Watch This, featuring Lucas Walks, and then they have Hold My Beer, a snowboard movie featuring Curtis Cizik. They had a whole lot more planned for winter, but with the quarantine, everything has been put on hold event-wise. The good news is that even with all that we're going through, you can still drink beer outside. Next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of Profuse Juice, a hazy IPA that I'm loving right now, and a beer that gives 1% of sales back to the Surfrider Foundation. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. So VHS sets the table for you to become a household name, pretty much. You and your brother and Plake and all those guys. All the people that had a film company that were making films showing them at the ski show. When the technology changed in 1 year, you went from that fringe thing at the ski show that 50 people may see to that thing that's going to sell 50,000 copies and everybody's going to see it in their house and people know who you are. Is that kind of how it changed, like overnight almost?
It did change that way. And as part of what I had gone to school for, I started to negotiate the rights to distribute every film we ever skied in.
Oh, wow. So you're on the back end too, getting a cut.
Correct. So I was the sales agent for Warren Miller east of the Mississippi. And there was a video store in every corner of every town in every state.
Yeah.
So my territory for selling videotapes for Warren was massive. I had international worldwide rights to all the North Face films. And then I started producing my own and carrying other titles. So I was shipping hundreds of videotapes out of my mom's attic all spring and summer long for a lot of years.
So that's like the summer job?
Uh-huh. Absolutely.
And is it making you more than the winter job of skiing? Because I would think in that distribution, you're able to make a lot of money if you can move a lot of units.
You know, it all worked together so well. We were promising the sponsors exposure. We were delivering on the exposure by being in so many different movies. We were getting a piece of the action on the sales of the films. And I had my own tour going. So I was touring through all the major ski shows and retail stores with the North Face. I was in all the REI stores, all the North Face stores, and all the major ski shows. Greg was touring all the colleges, and Warren had all the theaters. So the three of us, you know, were really road warriors and really paving the way for telling people about what we were doing.
Yeah, it's like you paved the way for a couple generations of skiers, I feel like, all the way through maybe 2008. And then that whole model of make a movie, tour it, that's all kind of dying, it seems like, because of the internet and the content that's going out there. Given you still have a couple heavy hitters doing the tours, but it's interesting to see how technology has changed things. But at that point, your life is about being a rock star. I would think you're either flying, driving, busing, wherever, going to the best places in the world. People are picking you up and they want to show you the best of their town. And then when they're done, they want to show you the best of what's going on at night. I mean, was it a big party thing where every day is après and it's a really fun time in your life?
It was a really special time in my life. I treasure those days. We were living in hotel rooms and the finest resorts and condos. We had free lift tickets and passes to every skier you could imagine. We had more gear than you can count. And we were living in a van in the West and we had a van in the East, and we were going to Europe for months at a time. And it was all pretty much a party. John and I brought a lot of energy to, to all that.
Yep.
We liked to have a good time, and we certainly did.
Did it ever become a problem? Because I think you've been sober for like 30 years.
I have been sober, coming up on 30 years here in June.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you, my friend. Yeah, I got sober very early. Probably 2 years after Babson. 2 years after Babson, I bottomed out. I had been partying hard my entire life up until that point.
Is it more than drinking and smoking pot?
Well, of course. I mean, in the 80s, you had a lot of other substances.
Powder
and
days.
a lot of different ways to do it. You know, of course, we weren't afraid of the mushrooms and a few other things while we were working. So I always said, and still do sometimes, you know, I had a partying problem. I just had too much fun. And everything changed for me after the Russia accident. My whole life changed.
Why don't you paint the picture for us?
Well, in 1990, John and I were invited on an international expedition to Mount Elbrus.
Yep.
And the storm crashed in to the mountain on summit day. 50 people from different expeditions were lost in the storm and 33 died.
Jesus.
And I was lost in that storm for 2 days. I believe I was dead when the Russian found me in my snow cave and brought me back to life. I was having the white light experience.
Is that when God comes back into your life too?
I mean, God never left me.
Sure.
But I had a very real experience on that mountain. And one of the really clear thoughts was going to heaven was going to be okay, and it would be really hard on John. That death was a very human experience. And that experience for me got interrupted by a 6'4" Russian when he slapped me around and brought me back. And from there, a lot of things just changed for me. When I finally got out of the hospital and got back to the States, I did pick up again, and things had changed. You know, I was angry. I was sad about the trip. My friends had died. And there was a lot of blame about that trip. There was a lot of misconceptions about that trip, and it was hard to find people to listen. So a lot of things had changed for me. And so I decided that I needed to get some help. And I'm glad that I did. You know, it wasn't easy for me to give up the party and lifestyle. I have really had to work at it.
Well, you live in a world where every day when you're done skiing, people expect to go party a little bit, or at least have a couple beers. Do you still go and hang out?
Well, I mean, back then it was hard to do that. I mean, everybody I traveled and skied with partied like rock stars, and they were.
Yep.
And people would tell me, my very close friends and relatives, you know, geez, you're more fun when you use.
Oh, that's not cool.
And they were right. You know, I was more fun. But I'm a stubborn kid, and I struggled with it. but I made it. These days, I'm a free man. I can come and go wherever the hell I want. Alcohol and drugs have no power over me at all. But back then it was different, and I had to really kind of hone in on it and make it a priority.
Well, I'm glad you were able to get sober and able to keep it up through all just the chaos that being a pro skier is, because when you look at your career, you made like 12 movies with Warren Miller. And the really cool part of you making these movies is that you and your brother always followed current events around the world. It was like wherever CNN was going to be, you wanted to be there. You went to all different kinds of conflict in different places that most just rad skiers don't think about going to.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing, because of my personal relationship with Warren, he was encouraging me to really step out and see the world. And he was telling me if I held on to my skis, they would take me all around the world like a jet airliner, and sort of all the Warrenisms. And so one day I went to him and I said, yeah, I want to go all around the world, Warren, wherever CNN was. And he just thought that was the greatest idea. He was all in on that idea. So when we jumped off the Berlin Wall in 1989, those images went around the world. When we ski in Russia during Perestroika and we're in Red Square, when the Red Army comes in to shut it down because of an Albanian protest, those images go around the world. And we started to get this reputation for going to these crazy spots. So people would approach us with the idea, hey, have you ever thought about going to Turkey? And well, during the first Persian Gulf War, we went to Turkey to ski with the Kurds.
Is that insane that you'd put yourself in a situation like that just to ski?
Well, it's amazing, right? Because when you get to the mountain culture, people are cool, right? They're different. There's no conflict. They're happy to see you. And what I say today is the world didn't become a safer spot. It became a more dangerous place today. Back then, people were curious about Americans. They didn't know too much about Americans. Americans hadn't been behind the Iron Curtain. But yeah, it was dangerous. I mean, we had guns pulled on us and we had to talk ourselves out of a lot of situations. When I was organizing the 1993 Middle East Peace Ski, sponsored by the UN, I snuck myself into Lebanon when it was illegal for Americans to go to Lebanon. And I had to make sure they didn't stamp my passport. So I got sponsored by the American Arab League. So they had prearranged my coming into immigration in Lebanon.
And this is all for the movie?
This is all for the movies, yeah.
One thing with the movies is I don't believe you get paid to be in the movies. Everything's paid for, but it's not like you're making money putting your life at risk and maybe spending the rest of your days in a Turkish prison.
And it's crazy, right? Because even back then when we were doing this stuff, there were still hostages in Iran, so it was a very real possibility that you could get stuck. But, the thing is, that's a good question. See, we were getting paid because we're the only skiers that owned their own footage inside the Warren Miller film.
So you were smarter than the rest of the skiers.
We were doing a good job. We were selling that footage to Warren. The footage he wasn't using, we were making our own films and television shows. We had the distribution company for VHS tapes and now television shows. And we owned a tour. I was doing 33 states in 3 months. So we had an outlet for this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing what you guys were able to do compared to most of the skiers, it sounds like, because you just had a full-time job going on other than during the winter.
No, it was a full-time job. I mean, I lived on the road for 10 months a year for close to 12 years.
And how many injuries do you experience during that? I think you did some knees. I think you had like 4 different knee surgeries. Back then, I would think the knee surgeries aren't what they are today. It's more of a hack job back then. What's your injury history?
Yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate, really. When people ask me that question, I always have to preface, we almost died several times.
But that's what you're paid for.
That's what we're paid for. And on the injury side, I did do 4 knee surgeries. I did them 4 years in a row, which was hard to do.
Same knee?
Same knee.
Ugh.
It's my good knee. And you would think with my dad being a doctor, I would have some insight to doctors, but I didn't want to go to any of his friends. None of them thought I could ever make it back from the surgeries. So I would hunt around to find somebody I could trust. And as it turned out, in the summers, while I was at college, going to summer school, I was also working soccer camps. And it just turns out that one of the kids I was coaching, his dad was a hotshot knee surgeon. And so I hooked up with Dr. Dan Snyder, and every time I showed up in his office, he would just ask me, how much time do we have this time? I would tell him how many months before I'd go back on tour, and he would fix it. And one time coming out of surgery, he says, you'll be all right. You'll be on a bike in 10 days. Come see me in the office. So 10 days later, I show up in his office, and he goes, what are you doing wearing your bike clothes? And I said, well, I rode here. He goes, how far? I said, 15 miles. He goes, Danny, a stationary bike.
They didn't take you out full seasons, it sounds like. You were able to come back and do a little bit every year.
I mean, I think that's why it kept breaking.
Yeah, for sure. You'd come back too early, but you were young and you wanted to do that.
Yeah. And, I had always told myself I would stop after 2, but I didn't. I finally threw the towel in after 4.
Is that why you stopped skiing for the camera every year, is because of the knee?
Yeah, I had my 4th knee surgery, and I was getting tired.
I mean, it's a lot of work to come back from it. I mean, like, you laugh and you're like, yeah, I got to come back in a couple months. But to come back from an ACL, for most people, it's 9 months before they feel good, 14 months before you feel like you're Superman again. And you were coming back in probably 8 to 10 months, and the amount of work you had to put in was just ridiculous, I would think.
Yeah, it was less than that. I mean, I was coming back in some cases 6 months, and sometimes less. And they were putting cryopreserved ligaments in my knee. They were wrapping them in plastic that dissolved. They were doing all sorts of stuff with my knee. I ended up getting sponsored by the company. I'd go to the orthopedic conferences to show off the work they were doing. They paid well. That was good. But yeah, I was tired, not just from the skis, not from the injuries, but more from the life. My life had shifted after Russia and getting sober and living on the road, coming into the mid-90s. I was kind of wanting something else. And I realized I didn't have any community in my life. I was living on the road. I had friends all over the world, but the woman at the post office didn't know my name.
You have no good friends, just like a lot of acquaintances?
Yeah, a lot of good friends, but never got to see them. And my perspective on life was changing because I was sober 3-4 years. So yeah, I kind of threw in the towel and moved to New Hampshire. And it was the first time I lived in a town for 12 months in a row in a long, long time.
And first time in a long time you don't have to use crutches as well, I would think.
Yeah, I haven't had a knee surgery since.
Well, good for you. From there, you're figuring out your way in the business world. And for you to do that, you went to Babson. So you have a great foundation to actually make things happen. And that's why you made them happen throughout your ski career. Unfortunately, Babson probably didn't have a class on what to do in a pandemic when you need to keep your company going. And that's where you are now, I feel like, in life. And that's a shitty place to be. But you know what? A lot of the world is in that place too. And that's just the crazy place we're at right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think being an agile thinking person is always important. It's gotten me through divorce. It's gotten me through ups and downs in businesses. It's gotten me through a lot of things. So I don't lack confidence even in the current phase of situation.
Well, that's a good trait to have. At this point, I have something that I call inappropriate questions. What I do is I get someone that you know to ask you 3 inappropriate questions. I don't know too many people that you know. So I go to one of my go-tos, the person I talk to every once in a while who's always the most unique, random, weird person. A guy you never filmed with, but he came up in our podcast, Greg Stump. Were you close at all with Stump in your days on the road?
We were close because he never called me back. It never worked out because we never had the right sponsors to ski with him. But back then, of course, it was sort of 2 camps. You were either with Warren or you were with Stumpy. I would say we're closer now than we've ever been. We definitely weren't that close when I was going hard.
Okay. Well, Stumpy's going to ask you 3 inappropriate questions as only he can do. I will go with the first one right now.
Okay. Inappropriate question number 1 for Danny. Do you feel any guilt or shame? I think shame might be a more appropriate word for being in the Ski Hall of Fame before Gary Nate, Bobby Burns, me. Do you have any shame, or is your sense of self-promotion, it validates you?
So there's the first one from Stump.
That really says more about Greg Stump than it does about me.
I am not going to disagree with you there.
Being part of the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame is one of the great honors for me. And if you've ever been up to Ishpeming,
No one has.
nobody has. It's worth the trip. I'll tell you that. It's only 7 hours north of of Detroit. You can't miss it.
They should take that building, dig it out, put it on like a double wide load and move it to a ski town.
They are thinking about it. But it is such an honor to be part of such a community. And now I'm the master of ceremonies for the induction ceremony every year. It's a great honor to be part of that and to tell the stories that need to be told. And it was a really interesting experience for me to be inducted because it allowed me to kind of go back and put my career in perspective and to wrap a bow around it.
Yep.
And to leave it where it belongs. It belongs in a very special spot, and it found its home.
I'm going to go with question number 2.
Why were you so fascinated, Dan, with the one-piece suits? Was it because when you actually bent your knees to ski properly, it tugged on your nutsack?
So most inappropriate questions are a little bit different than what Stump does, but Stump's a very unique individual. He did these a couple years ago for a girl he had never met before. He asked her if she had a threesome, and he also asked her if she liked pommel lifts because of how they rubbed on her. So these questions, while they aren't the best questions, it's not unique to you that you're getting these weird ones. This is what Stumpy does. But yeah, what did you think about those one pieces? Was it where they grabbed you?
I always tell people I was a king of day glow, man. We loved our one pieces. They're very comfortable, and you can tell that they're coming back. And there was always a market for them. At the end of every season, we would have the great used equipment sale in whatever parking lot we ended the season on. We'd open up the van and sell everything in it. And those one-piece suits jumped out of our van, and that always allowed us to get back home. So I have a lot of gratitude to the oneies.
All right. And we will go with our final inappropriate question.
Why do you always try to upstage your brother?
I've spent my whole career promoting my brother's entertainment value. And John is a great guy. We have a wonderful relationship. And I always say that I had a front row seat to one of the best skiers on the planet. And it's one of the great honors of my life to work with my brother and to ski the way we skied together.
Well, you two have had an amazing career. It's kind of like there was 2 different camps. Like you said, there was the Stump camp and there was the Warren Miller camp. And your side of the world, it was like you guys were Aerosmith, you and your brother. And then you had like the Led Zeppelin of the Schmidt, Plake, and Hattrip on the Stumpy side. But at the end of the day, you guys all helped change an industry. And while the narrative is that Stumpy and his crew set the way for the professional skier to not have to compete and get paid, it sounds like you were doing that years earlier, although no one knows that because it's much easier to market a dude with a big mohawk and Scott Schmidt and Hattrip as well.
Well, we all did it together, and it's a lot of fun now to think about that, for sure.
Well, I want to thank you for your time, man. I want you to stay safe and good luck in this chaotic business atmosphere that is coronavirus.
Hey, you too. All the best, man. Appreciate it.
So that was time with Dan Egan, and what an awesome guy. He's like that uncle that does all the cool shit. Skiing's Anthony Bourdain. Most skiers that I interview base their trips around conditions and terrain. And yeah, I'm sure Dan and John did that, but they also made sure they were at the most important events in the world. That strategy is such a cool one. As the pro skiers of today who get the best trips out there, yeah, they get all-time conditions a lot of the time, but that's it. Dan and John got so much more out of skiing. And thanks to Dan, they were smarter when it came to monetizing the business of being a pro skier. Hearing him say that he sold footage to Warren Miller and then distributed the final product, he got it more than any other skier I've ever talked to from back in the day, or the skiers I talked to today. I mean, what Dan did was the equivalent of Ian McIntosh shooting with a TGR cameraman and owning that footage, selling it back to TGR, and then, when TGR presses DVDs, Ian would warehouse them and ship them for the West Coast. That's the equivalent of what Dan was doing back in the day, and it's so crazy to think of an athlete doing that today. But it did happen a long time ago. As far as the inappropriate questions go, Dan asked me about them later, and I had no answer for him. While I love Greg Stump, he can come off as a jerk at times, and this was one of them. That's the show this week. At this point, I want to ask you to review me wherever you listen to me. I would run down how to actually do that, but you are all adults for the most part and you can figure it out. And I've given you those detailed instructions in the past and you really didn't review me. But whatever. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions or concerns for me, my email is mike@thepowellmovement.com and I will get back to you. Finally, I want to ask you to support my amazing sponsors who make this show happen. They are Evo, Stanley, 686, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Be safe and have a great week, everyone.